Good morning, everybody. Welcome. We are excited that you could join us today on our fundamental need for the natural world. My name is Alex Elliott. I am the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. As many of us are descendants of settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, we, CIIS public programs, must recognize and never forget that our university's building in San Francisco occupies traditional, unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. If you're interested in learning more about Native lands, languages, and territories, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. Now let me first introduce our presenters, Lucy Jones and Laura Pustarfi, and then we'll get right to their conversation. Laura Pustarfi is a scholar and writer focusing on trees in the Western philosophical tradition. She completed her doctoral work in philosophy and religion with a focus on ecology, spirituality, and religion at CIIS in 2019. Her dissertation, Arboreality, Revisioning Trees in the Western Paradigm, examines trees and plants in Western thought with particular focus on philosophical literature in order to explore an arboreal and vegetal ontology and ethics that respects plants themselves. She currently works as the Associate Director for the Psychedelic Assisted Therapies and Research Certificate Program, CPTR, here at CIIS. Lucy Jones is a writer and journalist based in Hampshire, England. She previously worked at NME and the Daily Telegraph, and her writing on culture, science, and nature has been published in BBC Earth, BBC Wildlife, The Sunday Times, The Guardian, and The New Statesman. Her first book, Foxes Unearthed, was celebrated for its brave, bold, and honest account of our relationship with the fox, winning the Society of Authors Roger Deakin Award in 2015. And now it is my absolute pleasure to hand it over to Laura and Lucy.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you especially to you, Lucy. We're here to speak about your book, Losing Eden, Our Fundamental Need for the Natural World and Its Ability to Heal Body and Soul. The UK subtitle is Why Our Minds Need the Wild, which I quite like, actually. And the book is such a well-researched and evocative look at how our health, especially mental health, is intertwined with the natural world. And I'm so looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Laura. Me too.
So in the book, you so beautifully weave science and your personal story together. Could you tell us a little bit about your earliest experiences of nature? Were you around nature much as a child yourself?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in in England in an area in kind of the suburbs of London, in a boarding school actually. So my kind of closest nearby environment was playing fields. So in no way kind of the wilderness, but there was a little brook, and there was the River Thames running through as well. And we had a little garden with a couple of apple trees. And I was encouraged to learn about the rest of nature by my parents. My father was very interested in birds, and would take us for long walks. And my mother is a painter of the natural world. So I was kind of fortunate that I had these two influences as a child, kind of introducing me to the idea of kind of kinship with others, other beings. And I used to love collecting insects in my garden and climbing trees. I spent quite a lot of time in Scotland, which was a lot more remote and rural, and kind of the sea was wilder, and there were kind of lots of birds of prey and woods and so on. And those spaces in Scotland became really important to me, I think, to my kind of imagination growing up. And I was really fortunate that I had those opportunities to spend time kind of with trees and in woodlands and so on. Saying that, I think my I guess my kind of philosophical kind of experience of the outdoors or spending time in nature was quite influenced by the Judeo-Christian tradition. I grew up in a very conservative evangelical family, and while I was encouraged to learn about and know about wildlife, so I'd have kind of wildlife fact books, there was a sense, I think, that humans were kind of exceptional, or that it was quite a kind of anthropocentric view of the natural world, maybe, an idea that that's a kind of an idea of dominion was definitely present in my kind of early influences and so on. So kind of going through life, it has been it has evolved, my sense of nature. But I was really lucky to have some time, and of course we know that one of the most important factors in a person in adult life having a relationship or connection with the natural world is whether they've had opportunities as a child. So I am so glad that I was taken out for walks, even when I would complain as an older child and grouse about it. I think that at those times the my senses were kind of awakened, and being able to smell pine trees and listen out for bird calls was really important. Though of course I had then a very long dormancy period, which often people do in their teenage years and young adulthood, the end of which began the Losing Eden journey.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like such a rich childhood experience and memories. And I do want to just ask about that time that you talk about in the book. You've been very open and vulnerable about your own challenges and mental health struggles in that time of disconnection from nature. And that can be a very private thing and even taboo in some places. So I'm curious how it's been for you to share your experiences so openly, and what's been the response?
Sure. I think I'm quite I find the kind of taboo and well, we definitely have it a lot over here in the UK, this kind of stiff upper lip and idea that you don't talk about your emotions and your emotional health or your mental health are kind of a taboo or even shameful or embarrassing if you have mental health struggles. And I just don't like that. I think it's really harmful. And so I feel quite comfortable talking about I mean, obviously after the fact, not during, but I've had experience of depression and anxiety and addiction issues. And I suppose because I'm very interested in the mind and psychology and the brain and psychoanalysis, I'm really happy to talk about those experiences, because I think that it's just really important to do that if you can. And I guess I couldn't really write about Losing Eden without bringing that personal story in, because it was so it was really the catalyst and the kind of genesis of the journey of the book, was this experience of going into recovery and feeling very fragile and shaky and trying to get sober and recover from periods of depression and anxiety, and being so bowled over by how profoundly therapeutic connecting again with the natural world was, that I just really wanted to find out what was going on. And so I kind of needed to write about that in the beginning of the book, to explain, I think, kind of my impetus. I haven't had any negative, I don't think, responses to writing openly about mental health. I think it was probably quite difficult for certain older members of my family for me to write about addiction and sobriety, because of course, there's still a lot of stigma around addiction. But in my personal experience is that I have been and am helped every day by other people sharing their stories of recovery. So it didn't feel difficult to do that myself. And I think, sharing is really important. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for so courageously sharing that story in the book and here. And so you mentioned that nature was critical for you as you regained your health, that this was part of your process. And in the book, you talked about your walks in the marshes as rehab in a way. How did you come to those daily walks? And can you tell us what it was like for you?
Sure. So this was almost 10 years ago or so. And I guess I say that because I feel like, and this is great, that in the last few years, certainly over here in the UK, the nature and mental health as a subject has become a lot more like kind of normal to talk about, and people are making that connection, and it's quite present in the discourse. But 10 years ago or so, for me anyway, in my kind of peer group and understanding, it wasn't obvious to me that at this time of kind of a health crisis, that spending time in the natural world might be helpful or therapeutic, which and that was interesting to me after the fact, that it never even really it really occurred to me that connecting again with the living world might be important. So what happened was, I was newly sober. All the psychological issues that I'd been drinking away for a long time were coming up. I was feeling very kind of angry and raw, and kind of casting around for things to do to keep my mind busy and brain busy, kind of between psychotherapy appointments, psychiatric appointments, and support groups. And I knew that running was good for your mind. I knew that the endorphins could help, because I'd often used running in the past to stabilize myself. And so I started to go running in Walthamstow Marshes, and it is a really incredible place. It's this open space in a very built up area. You kind of come off a busy road with loads of buses and trains and traffic and big roundabouts, quite industrial, and suddenly you're in this vast kind of calm marshland, which is actually a site of scientific interest. It has different plants and wildflowers, and in fact, one of the reasons why it's quite richly biodiverse is because it was bombed in the war, and the way that affected the soil means that it was kind of very low nutrients, so it had a lot of wildflowers, and it was filled with kind of kestrels and herons, and I started running there. But I found that what would happen was I would slow down and start walking instead, because I just wanted to look at the trees and look at the canal and spend time with the coots. And it sounds so naive kind of saying this now, but it was so surprising to me, that doing that would then have this profound effect, where I would go back to my flat and just feel restored, and my brain seemed to be cleared of these really cruel critical thoughts, the rumination and brooding that I'd kind of been drinking or using on, and of course I knew, as we all kind of intuit, that there's this cultural idea that spending time in a park or by the river or by a sea is maybe in some way good for us, but I had no idea at that point that it could be so profoundly helpful and healing and of nourishing and deeply stabilizing. And so it became one of the one of the things alongside the more conventional therapies that I don't like the word used, but I suppose I grew to rely on over my early recovery, and it has been present and growing ever since in later periods as well of postnatal depression. So that was the kind of personal experience that got me thinking quite quickly, what is going on here? I know how well, we don't really know, but we know a little bit about how an antidepressant works, or how psychotherapy works, or how my support groups are working, but what is happening when I'm with these trees? What happens to our brains? What happens to our nervous systems, our microbiome? What's happening to our memories? What's happening to our hormones? I was thinking I really wanted to kind of drill down into the nuts and bolts of that experience, and find out if there was a mechanism, or if there were multiple mechanisms. So that was the beginning. Of course, the question then did flip quite soon afterwards, to thinking how this kind of, well, for me, it's long estrangement, long disconnection from nature had affected my mental health. But really the book is about everyone, and more broadly, those of us in the kind of industrialized global north, how our estrangement and disconnection from the rest of the living world is affecting our minds.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you really built a relationship there with the marshes while you were out on those runs and walks. And there was another very compelling piece in the book where you mentioned a particular pear tree that was outside of a window where you lived, and that you would watch it every day. And it was covered by scaffolding at one point, and it kind of made you realize how important that tree was to your day-to-day life. And I'm curious to hear more about that tree and what happened for you.
Sure. Yeah. So I was living in a flat in northeast London. The marshes were about a kind of 20-minute walk run. I was maybe 10-15 minutes from a park. So it was quite a kind of urban environment. We didn't have a garden or a yard or anything like that. There were a few street trees, but outside our bedroom window there was a pear tree, and I don't reckon I would have even noticed it kind of before I had this recovery journey. And I just started to feel really attached to it. I would watch it through the seasons. It would kind of erupt with this amazing blossom in spring, and then through the summer I'd watch as these pears kind of were blown up by the tree, and it was just so beautiful, and different birds would come in, blue tits, and even a woodpecker. And then I'd watch as the pears would drop, and then it would kind of go all brittle and quiet, and then I mean the best bit was April, and seeing those beautiful green buds just start like tap 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 creaking. And I just, at that point in my life, feeling like I can recover, I can get better, I can be sober, and things change. It became a kind of symbol of change in terms of the flux of life, and the fact everything in our world is always in flux, but also constancy. That this tree was always there every day, and I could always see it, and I would always kind of know what might be happening in it. And so the neighbours were doing some building work, and they put up this scaffolding, and they it blocked the tree from my view, and it was really thick, ugly scaffolding. And the effect on me was kind of surprising, even though I knew that I was loving this tree. I became really irritable in the flat, and I'd send like passive aggressive texts to my neighbors asking when it was going to come down, and be snappy, and I felt really kind of caged, even to the point where some evenings I would feel kind of my throat constricting with tears. And at that time, still really estranged from nature, really, apart from my marshes, I was thinking, what is going on? Could this tree really have such an effect on my emotional world? how is this working? What's happening here? And if one tree can have this effect on my life, and obviously at that time I was pretty fragile, and I mean I'm highly sensitive anyway, but I was very sensitive at that point. What is the fact that we are stripping the world of trees, and we are expecting people to live on streets without trees? What is that doing kind of to us collectively? And yeah, I wanted to discover what was going on there.
I'm curious what happened with the tree. Did the scaffolding come off, or?
It did, yeah. It came down, and I saw the tree again, and we were reunited. And I don't live there anymore. We left about 5 years ago, and I actually had a text from the guy who lives there, because I got some books accidentally delivered there, and I couldn't help myself but say, please send my regards to the pear tree. And I'm hoping it's still there. But I guess I probably had relationships with trees as a child, but that was probably my first relationship with a tree as an adult that was really meaningful. And that has continued. I have a new favorite tree, which is a beech tree, and it's almost as if that kind of kicked things off for me. I feel like I have a evolving relationship with a beech tree, which is really important to me.
Yeah, they can be almost as important as relationships with human people as well.
Yeah.
I really appreciated how you talked about your children and the experiences you've had introducing them to the natural world too, maybe introducing them to your favorite trees. And you talk about the research, and you mentioned it earlier about how important it is as a child to have contact with nature. And I'm curious if you'd be willing to tell us a little bit more about how it's been watching little ones interact with nature.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the it's been really incredible, actually, and a massive gift to see the world kind of through their eyes. So I have an almost 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 5-month-old, and I think that what I first noticed is that whenever I couldn't settle them, they were just crying and crying and crying. If I went outside and showed them some trees moving in the wind, or walked to our local cemetery, which is my local green space, and walked around trees, it seemed to usually soothe them. Something about the movement, I think, nature's mobile, and definitely soothed me as well, because it's so symbiotic. And one of the research studies that I mentioned in the book is one about newborn babies being shown different videos. One is of a moving chicken, which the researchers call biological motion display. And the study concludes that even very early on, newborn babies prefer to watch movement, which doesn't sound particularly surprising, really. You'd imagine that a baby has evolved to look for where the mother is as the source of food. But I've definitely seen that in my young children. There's something about the motion in the natural world which seems to keep their attention much for longer than in a home with a toys or something static. Also, one of the most kind of strange and interesting things I started to notice with my daughter was that she would like to eat soil in the garden. So and I thought it was kind of interesting to me that she would always put the soil in her mouth, obviously try and get it out, but and at the same time we moved to a house with a garden, and I started gardening for the first time in adult life, and realized that afterwards I would feel really good, really kind of a real buzz after gardening. And I was interested in what was happening there as well. And I ended up talking to a few of the leading microbiologists who study microbacteria in the soil. And I was talking to them about this particular microbacteria called M. vaccae, which is tiny critter found in the soil, which has been found in studies to have antidepressant-like effects on the brain. And it was kind of mind-blowing to me. They also told me that babies all over the world tend to eat soil. They're kind of drawn to soil. And I thought it was so interesting that, you know, she was eating soil, and at the same time I was perhaps being exposed to these old friends, these bacteria that we've evolved with over millennia, that might have been at the time kind of boosting my serotonin. And how many other bacteria might there be in the soil that we just don't know about, or how it affects us. And I think that, I mean, we spend as much time outside as we possibly can, but there's just so many things I've noticed, from sometimes if it's a day of meltdowns and tempers running high, and, you know, if we go into the woods, everyone just seems to relax. It's not always like that. It's not always perfect. Sometimes it's only 10 minutes, but it does seem to have a calming effect on my children. And also the senses again, you know, I think one of the things that I've gathered from them is a more tactile relationship with the natural world. I think I was much more visual before having children, maybe, and oral, but, you know, a baby will, even a 4-month-old baby will grab a branch and shake it and want to look at a leaf, or will want to touch bark, you know, and really feel it. My daughter likes to put her hand out and see if a bumblebee will walk on her hand, and they're tactile children, and that's really, I've really kind of benefited from that. And I suppose you know, kids are so estranged from the rest of nature today. They spend, I think it's 12,000 hours in a classroom throughout their education, and you can just see how, well, I have noticed in my children that they just naturally love all the other beings. They love the spiders and the woodlice, and we're lucky in the, well, I don't know if lucky is the word, but we don't have really dangerous spiders or anything, so they can kind of play around outside and make friends. And, you know, they refer to the bumblebees as he's or she's or they's, and, you know, that there is a just automatic natural kinship that I see in them. And then of course the influences come in, and they kind of influence that out of children, the way we keep them up in classrooms. And one of the most mind-blowing statistics I write about in Losing Eden is that children today spend less leisure time outdoors than inmates and incarcerated people, you know, who have to, by UN law, have a certain amount of time outside. We've just made it so difficult for children to play outside, you know, traffic and roads and so on. But yeah, it's been an amazing gift seeing the world through their eyes. And of course, because they are so close to the ground, they spot things that I don't spot. They'll always find beetles and things like that.
Yeah, it must be just so wonderful, kind of seeing through their eyes. That statistic about children spending less time outside than inmates, there's just so much there, and so many things for children, for incarcerated people. And just that was a very shocking statistic for me as well. And yeah, and just to go back to the book itself, I actually found for myself that while I was reading your book, the more that I read it, the more I wanted to be outdoors while I was reading. So I found myself going outside and actually reading the book quite often as I was finishing up. I'm wondering if you have practices like reading outdoors or other things that keep you connected to the natural world? Is there anything you do regularly now to keep yourself connected?
Oh, it's a lovely question. I'm so glad that it had that effect on you. And that's something that I've heard people say, and I never kind of expected it. Really, like really, when I mean, the book is essentially a kind of a synthesis of the most compelling and interesting scientific evidence I could find, but also kind of more esoteric and more I don't know, I guess kind of philosophical thought I could find about why our minds need the wild. So I'm really glad to hear that. I'm a really big I really love the little things, the miniature and the kind of small details. So I like to go out with my hand lens, and I'm always drawn to moss and lichen. And I have a particular moss wall in the local cemetery, which is my local natural environment, and I really love looking at moss and lichen and seeing what I can find. So I'm very keen on insects as well, and invertebrates. I'm always kind of looking to see. It's I'm often with the young children, so I can't always linger too long. It's kind of dependent. Sometimes I like to just go and kind of sit under my favorite tree and just be there. I'm also, I really love swimming outside. So when we moved out of London to this area in the countryside in England, I'm in a very urban town. Actually, I live in a really urban area, but about 10 minutes away we have some nice rivers, and we call it wild swimming. But swimming in very cold rivers is something that I try and do as much as I can. And I write about that a bit in the book, because I tried to work out what was happening in those rivers, and I was recovering from period of postnatal depression and postpartum depression, and it was those rivers, which was almost like the marshland experience, where I would be feeling so overwhelmed and so anxious and just really unstable, but I'd go to the river and swim in the cold water and just feel a bit of relief, and it was quite a spiritual place for me. I guess in some ways I felt quite kind of transcendent, but also I was looking, because there's not that much scientific evidence about kind of cold water swimming, even though anyone who does it will say anecdotally, I feel much better afterwards, etc. But there is evidence that negative ions, which are ions which are created when waters hit together, so waves, waterfalls, anywhere where there's kind of motion in water, those negative ions may have antidepressant like effects too. And I noticed that in this cold water area, I was always drawn to sit by the waterfall and just kind of be around. So perhaps there was something going on. And I think that's one of the things that I learned through my journey, which was that previously, before having this kind of reconnection and research interest, I thought or was taught that my body and my mind were kind of impervious to our environment and the rest of nature, that I was kind of like, my skin was kind of adamantine, or so separate from the rest of nature, almost like it was a force field. Whereas through reading the literature and finding out about phytoncides, the chemicals emitted by trees, the microbacteria, these negative ions, I realized how kind of porous we are, and how the interactions between us and our environments, whether they're urban or natural, are myriad, and I think more deeper and more important than our society kind of realizes. And I love being outside as much as possible, reading outside, writing outside. But yeah, those are the looking for mushrooms. I love looking for fungi, which is coming up quite soon. Just seeing what I can find.
Ah, beautiful. And I mean, there's so many different practices. Thank you for sharing those. And I'm wondering if we can shift just a little bit. You've talked a bit about some of the studies and science, and your book really shows this large and growing body of scientific evidence showing the benefits of these things, and um, especially how much humans benefit from having trees and green growing things around kind of everywhere in the workplace, your hospitals, at home. You even mentioned in the book that it could be an issue of public health, which I thought was really interesting. And I don't think very many people think about the natural world this way. So can you tell us a little bit more about how nature impacts health and well-being and some of the studies behind it?
Yeah, sure. So I thought that perhaps there might be one mechanism to explain, which was, kind of absurd looking back on it. But in fact, what I found was that connection with the rest of the living world can really affect us from our heads to our toes. So we all probably know that there could be something restorative about natural environments. But did you know that when you're in a natural environment compared to a built environment, you recover from stress more completely and more quickly? And that may be because when we're in nature, our nervous systems are more likely to be balanced. So our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the one associated with kind of rest and digest and feelings of calm and contentment, as opposed to the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, and so on. And that also means that spending time in nature can even enhance our immune function, our immune systems, and reduce inflammation, which we're starting to now learn that there's a link between inflammation and mental health, psychological health. There are so many areas and interactions. I'll tell you a few of my favorites. One is to do with petrichor, which is that wonderful word for the smell of the earth after it's rained. So if there's been a dry spell and then it rains, the compound geosmin is released from the earth, which is what the word petrichor is for. And in studies, studies suggest that when we smell geosmin, the compound, it activates areas of the brain associated with calmness and relaxation. And we can detect geosmin at kind of really low levels, presumably because, as we evolved for 99% and have lived 99% of our evolutionary history in the natural world, we evolved to need to smell irrigated landscapes. So I love that when it's been dry and then you smell the rain, just kind of thinking about how that might be affecting our brains. Another favorite of mine is the impact of fractal shapes. So fractal shapes are found all over the place in the natural world. Trees, leaves, flowers, salt flats, lightning, fractal broccoli, even kind of weeds coming up from the cracks of the pavements will be fractal in shape, which means that it's the same shape repeating in various degrees of size. And a great guy called Richard Taylor found that the particular dimension found in nature of fractal shapes, which I think is between 1.3 and 1.5, had specific effects on brain activity associated with calmness and well-being, with the conclusion being that we would feel a lot less stressed if we spent more time looking at fractal shapes and being in the natural world. Birdsong can reduce blood pressure. We know that phytoncides, the the chemicals emitted by trees can also have measurable effects on our health. There's so many areas now measured and studied by scientists in so many different disciplines across continents to show that we really need the natural world for our sanity. We really need restorative natural environments. And I say that it's an issue of public health because while the study of environmental health and environmental injustice has often, or kind of to date, focused on matters like air pollution, water pollution, hazardous waste, etc. There's also now, it's kind of funny, isn't it, that we need the science to prove to us what so many people know, and obviously indigenous and traditional communities just know this, that we need the natural world, but now the science of nature and health is proving unequivocally that we need more nature for happy, healthy lives. Now it looks as though if there are communities living in areas with a paucity of the rest of nature, or on streets without any street trees, or in tower blocks with no or projects with no access to restorative living environments, the lack of that and the kind of injustice and inequitability of that is deeply unfair. And the science shows now that these are, it's almost like being able to sleep well or having good food. It's not something that's a luxury or a frill or something just for the wealthy, or something that is a kind of add-on or an optional extra for a good life. It's actually something that I believe through the research is telling us that we fundamentally need, in order to be okay with living on this earth.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's issues of accessibility and where trees are located in the cities. They're such important pieces so that everyone has access to the natural world and to these amazing benefits, physical and mental health.
Yeah, and I think that equitable tree cover is so important for so many reasons. One of them obviously being that in our global heating world, shade and tree cover for shade, but also there's some really interesting work coming out about how background nature and unintentional nature trees are really significantly important. So while I was writing the book and looking at all the research, I was really conscious that so many people I know don't love nature in the way I do, or don't want to climb trees on the weekend, or want to look for insects. And there's this idea that it's just kind of for people who love the natural world in that way, conscious way. But in fact, what studies are showing us is that living on a street with trees and having kind of unintentional contact with the natural world is super important, and has these measurable effects on population health as well.
Mm-hmm. Such an important point. I want to talk a little bit about that word that you use so often, nature. It can be loaded, a bit confusing. What's really included, what's not? Are trees, are buildings included? Are human-made things included? So what does nature mean to you? How do you define that term?
That's a really good question. I have a real conflicted relationship with that word. I'm kind of trying not to use it so much at the moment because I think it has a lot to answer for. In that it cements that idea that we have, that it's nature's out there and we're separate from it, and we're not nature. But saying that, it is a kind of heuristic in a way, or it's a way that people understand thinking about the natural world. I think it's impossible to define the word nature, isn't it? And I'm really interested in how people use it, and how, you know, how our vocabulary and our language affects the way we feel about the natural world, and how our kind of paucity of our lexicon for the living world maybe really affects how we kind of respond to it psychologically. For example, the marshland that I loved, I fell in love with, was called officially an SSSI, a site of something scientific interest, which, you know, something like that should be called like the land of wonder, or like a place of awe. We strap these kind of scientific names on places, and I think that they divest them of the wonder and awe and solace and joy that people can find there. Even the word kind of environment, the environment, you know, as if it's not our environment, as if it's not our home, or, you know, national parks. And in the States, you don't have national parks across all states. It's not equitable at all. But the word, I'm trying to, as when I can, instead of the word nature, just use the word life at the moment. That's what I'm kind of trying out, because I think certainly I've seen this in England. There's this idea that saving nature or conserving nature or protecting nature is kind of so detached from the human world. And, you know, it's just like those insects, or, you know, the birds and the butterflies and so on. And we seem to have this kind of lacuna of acknowledging the interconnectedness of all beings. And you know, that if the insect apocalypse continues, it's not just their lives that are gonna be in trouble, it's all of our lives. So yeah, I try and use the rest of nature, or the rest of the living world, where I can, to kind of make that point. But I don't know, can I put the question back to you? I'm really interested in whether you use that word or what you think about it.
Yeah, thank you. I try to avoid that word also. I think it has a long history of kind of being romanticized and used in various ways. Different people mean different things. So I've used the non-human world, which also has its own problems, since it's thinking about the natural world in relationship to humans, that it's not human. But others have used the more than human world and other terms. And I really think we need some new terms also. And I love life. I think that's one of the best terms. So I love that's one that you've come to. And I want to go a little bit more. You mentioned the awe and wonder. Why do you think awe and wonder is so important to reconnecting with the natural world?
Yeah, I absolutely loved. Sorry, I interrupted you. Was that
I
the end of?
I just said with life rather than the natural world.
Yeah, with life. So yeah, this is one of my favorite areas of research. Was the science of awe, which is led by Dasha Kaltner in California. Actually, you might know him. So he's done some really interesting work into how awe affects our minds and our bodies and so on. And I guess like everyone, I would have beforehand thought awe is a nice experience, or it feels good to listen to an amazing piece of music, or look at an incredible painting, or see a mountain, or so on. But reading deeper into it, I had no idea how that feeling awe could change our biochemistry. It can actually it's the one emotion, positive emotion, which seems to have a direct effect on a particular biomarker for inflammation, cytokines. So it can have a real effect on our bodies, and on our minds and our brains and our feelings of well-being. It can even make us kinder and more generous. So the research has found that when people feel awe, they're more likely to be kind of pro-social and more giving. And I think that's really important because, well, personally for me, I love finding awe and wonder in the natural world, and for me it's often in the small things, like I mentioned, or like kind of mushrooms, or thinking about the mycelial networks, or looking in my hand lens into moss. It's a kind of quietening of my sense of self, and in studies they show that when we experience awe, activities in the default mode network, which is the area of the brain associated with sense of self, are lessened. It's that connecting into something vaster and bigger than ourselves, which as someone who's prone to rumination and brooding, it is a deep relief. But I think if awe can make us kinder and more generous, that is something that we should be seeking. And I think that we, there's so much wonder available in life, and kind of going back to the children aspect, when we coop kids up, or we don't give children direct experience with life, we cut off and restrict their opportunities for wonder and awe, and those are important for the reasons I've outlined, the research that we know about, but also I truly believe that it's through experiencing awe and wonder and feeling that kind of that wow factor, and that sense of kind of love and that emotional experience is what will lead to making people care about working against the forces of destruction and extinction, and we know that if people have that experience as a child, they're more likely to be more pro-environmental as adults, and I think that it's really, I feel like that's a real keystone area of research in how to kind of switch our anthropocentric imaginings outwards.
Yeah, it's really this relationship with other beings, that sense of love.
I mean, saying that, I'm talking about this from my perspective of privilege and having these opportunities. I write more about this in the book, but of course there are many systemic and structural barriers and obstacles for all people experiencing that. So those are barriers that need to be overcome, so everybody can have that experience with the rest of nature.
Thank you. I sit in that privileged position also, and agree. And I'm curious to ask about the non-human or natural or living beings themselves. So much of the conversation is about how we humans relate to nature, at least in Western cultures, which is my lineage as well. And what about the trees, the animals, the insects themselves? What do you think about their relationship to us?
What an amazing question. I love that question. I've been trying to think more about that, and I have a practice at the moment where I try and imagine that I'm one of the insects, like a hoverfly in my garden, and to write from their perspective to try and kind of decenter me. Well, I think there's so much we don't know. I mean, we're finding out a little bit, scratching the surface of how trees communicate, and the networks and the mother trees and so on. I think it will be so interesting if we can discover what how trees and insects, how we are kind of affecting them in more indirect ways. I would say that I'm quite careful with, because kind of picking up on a few of our threads, having young children who are very tactile, who want to touch insects or touch plants and flowers. It's often kind of on my mind a little bit about that direct impact. Previous to having kids, I might and realizing that tactile relationship with life is possible. I probably would have, as I said before, been looking at things a bit more. But these days I am kind of always thinking about, does that bumblebee want to be on your hand? Does that bumblebee want to be stroked? Or how can we not walk in a way that doesn't affect the wildflowers? Or my kids were today hitting a tree, the bark of a tree with sticks, and my husband actually said, maybe the tree doesn't want to be hit by a stick. So I don't know. I'm early in this journey, and I love the question. I would love to know. I've been looking this week at an alder tree, and the patterns that the caterpillar makes on the alder tree when it eats it, and the kind of lattice work. And it looked to me like a language, like it looked kind of like Morse code, or like almost like another language. And of course there's so much we don't know, and I just love that so much. We think that we know everything as human beings, but imagine what they think of us walking around. What about you? I really want to know what you think about that.
I have lots of thoughts about that, but I think just asking the question is really important. And in your response, you talked about really that intentional moment, just thinking, how do I walk without interrupting the flowers, or even with what your husband said, maybe the tree doesn't want to be hit. So, I mean, can we even think about, well, what the tree wants? Could it want things? And ultimately, I kind of think as humans, we're so situated in our human embodied experience that we can't really know. Just like I can't really know what's going on for you. We can't really know, but we can be curious. And I think that's really wonderful. So
I agree.
And after that, I kind of hate to ask this question, but I want to ask as well, because you talk in the book about grief. There are these realities of climate change, deforestation, species extinction happening in our world, not to even mention the pandemic and everything that's coming up with that. So yeah, how do we handle this reality, especially kind of the mental health aspect, and what's helped you as you interacted with the natural world?
Yeah, it's like so bittersweet, kind of reconnecting with life at this time. A year or so in, obviously, after kind of reconnecting, I fell into a state of ecological grief, and realizing how much has been destroyed and is being destroyed, and so on, and all the forces that have done that. I find that the one thing that helps me is kind of quite hyper local activism and organizing. So being in touch with other people who I can talk about grief with, and who can empathize, and also just doing what I can locally to make a bit of a difference. So had a really intense experience this year of me and my neighbor and friend trying to rewild a field at the back of our house. It's less than an acre, but we wanted to let it grow and just let whatever wanted to come up, and whoever wanted to move in. It was previously it was like an amenity lawn, just mown down, kind of out the way though. And by May, it was so full of life. And it's like a stone's throw from a massive shopping mall and like a railway station. But just by stepping back, you know, and that being a response to the extinction and destruction and fetish for mowing that we have in this country everywhere, of just like seeing everything mown down constantly because of the kind of cosmetic aesthetic. It came up to life. It was so full of life. It was buzzing and humming, and we go out in the evenings. It was full of grasshoppers and crickets and moths and butterflies and so many different species of grass. It's kind of like this little prairie meadow. And then we heard the mowers, and they came and they took it. They mowed the whole thing, even though we had this agreement for them not to. Hopefully the agreement is more solid for next year, but it was so heartbreaking and devastating to see, to be that evening in this place full of life, and the next day just destroyed, just like the arisings, you know, the dead grass. We were distraught, really distressed. But you know, if we feel it, we can be galvanized by it, you know. And the IPCC report obviously last week, and how horrendous the global heating is at the moment, and habitat destruction. I find, for me, the antidote is to do what I can, kick up a fuss locally, try and change things as much as I can. And you know, I guess ironically, it's always to go back to the source. It's always, you know, for me, it is to go into to seek life in these living environments, and find a kinship, and thinking about reciprocity, and think about how to have a more reciprocal relationship with the rest of nature. Saying that, I'm not living in a place which is at the forefront of global heating, and you know, we have kind of cultural issues, which is basically mowing. Like, I was in my favorite cemetery the other day and looking at beautiful butterflies, and then the mowers come in and they mow it all down. But you know, that's different. So I appreciate that for a lot of people it's becoming more dangerous to go outside, and you know, their natural environments are going. And you know, I think that yeah, it's complex, but yeah, for me, seeking life still is the antidote. Yeah, trying to stand up against the forces of destruction.
And I appreciate the different scales in your answer. There's kind of the global piece, and then there's the very local piece, and also it hits me that there's the lot, it sounds like, came back so quickly, and came back to life, and then kind of in enough, I don't know, maybe a couple hours, it was taken away. So it gives me some hope that we have the ability to help with this regeneration if we just kind of stop these destructive pieces.
Exactly. And just as you say, it is amazing how rapid that restoration happened, and there's so many positive stories about you know, is it humpback whales kind of bouncing back, and how simple and easy it is really for us just to step back, actually. You know, it's not the kind of excessive management of natural habitats is done. We just need to take a step back and let life thrive.
Yeah. Well, I also want to ask you a little bit about ecotherapy that you write about in the book. That seems like such a wonderful integration of kind of mental health directly with the natural environment, maybe with the help of a professional. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about ecotherapy.
Yeah, so ecotherapy can mean lots of kind of different things. It can mean, you know, going conducting psychotherapy in the natural environment, or it can mean a more of an umbrella term, including things like horticultural therapy or woodland therapy, wilderness therapy. I don't like the word using, it's so utilitarian, but I suppose combining the natural environment with kind of therapeutic help in some way. So one of the places I visited in my research was a place called Thrive, which has been running horticultural therapy programs for a number of decades. And that will be people who have learning difficulties or mental health difficulties, dementia, who will come and basically garden and do gardening and be supported in that, and the results and that are very effective. And it was kind of interesting interviewing horticultural therapists, because they have been doing this for a long time. You know, it's been decades. So when kind of I come in and say, oh, the science is telling us now that, you know, spending time with nature is really good for you, they kind of, you know, they know it, even though it hasn't been like, you know, empirically proved for them in that way, and it has now. They know it, of course they do. And I think one of the most affecting visits I did was to a medium secure unit in England, where I sat down with a couple of service users. So that means that they kind of have a severe mental illness, and they're also in the criminal justice system. And my kind of initial thought was that maybe spending time in nature or nature connection was good for, you know, the worried people with more medium to mild mental health conditions, but that those with on a more severe end, it wouldn't touch the sides, or, you know, it wouldn't do anything. That was quickly quashed when I looked into the evidence, and particularly visited this medium securing unit, where the service users would do ecotherapy in the garden, and the woman who ran it was really kind of adamant that growing things was such an intrinsic part of human life, that if people have no access to the rest of nature, then they'll just get even more ill. And yeah, ecotherapy is growing in England. There's a kind of growing social prescribing movement of nature-based interventions, where doctors will kind of prescribe it. Obviously it comes with its complexities and issues as well. And I know that obviously in the States, and I think particularly in the West Coast, you have a long history and tradition of eco-psychology, and yeah, I guess the two terms can be a bit interchangeable as well. But I think more people are practicing therapy outside in England for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good option for people who need that support, and as well. So I just have one more question for you, and then we'll head to some Q&A. And I'm curious, kind of, you've already got another book out, or out soon in the UK, the Nature's Seed, kind of about how to raise kids with that relationship to nature, what we talked about earlier. Wondering what else is coming up for you. What other future projects, maybe railing against your local mowers, but what else is coming up for you in the future?
I'm working on a book about maternal mental health and the kind of ecology of early motherhood. It's kind of a mixture of I don't know, I'm really interested in matrescence, which is the kind of transition into motherhood, and I'm really interested in space. I'm really interested in kinship, and what that could mean. And I guess I'm trying to draw a line in a way. I'm not sure how it's going to look, but between, I think, disconnection and connection, and how our disconnection from the rest of nature is also, you know, connected to our disconnection from each other in the way we live, and how that affects women or people in early parenthood. So yeah, that's kind of something that's bubbling away in the background. But yeah, I have been researching nature and childhood over the last year for a book, called The Nature Seed, about how and why kids need more nature. So yeah, that's what I'm up to.
Yeah, wonderful. We'll be anxiously awaiting that research and those books of yours.
Thank you.
So why don't we take a few questions from the audience? And here's a question from Patrick. How would you define wild?
Thanks, Patrick. Such a good question. Something I've thought about a lot. I love the book. I don't know if you've read it, by Roderick Nash, Wilderness in the American Mind. It's interesting. I didn't write that title for the UK edition, Why Our Minds Need the Wild. But I thought it was an interesting choice. I think I would say, similarly to the word nature, it's very immutable. It's very undefinable. In England, where I live, there is no wilderness. There is no, really kind of, there's nothing comparable to like Yellowstone or Yosemite, or I guess that means probably that my personal kind of understanding of it, definition of it, and it is used a lot even in England, as a, we have initiatives called like Wilder Streets and Wilder Schools, and I guess it, it is a alternative to nature. For me, I really like Jung's image of the house, that the kind of modern human mind is like a house. And so we're kind of in the modern day living right on the very top, and then you have the different floors of history, and his kind of idea is that we don't see, or we forget, that the foundations and the basement is our kind of, I'm not sure about this word primitive, but our like evolutionary history, our time spent, on the savannah, and our time spent where nature was home. And I feel like occasionally I kind of understand what that means, and that to me is the wild times, or connecting with that kind of wilder nature, and often that would be, being in the ocean, or swimming in a river, or so on. So yeah, I guess that, that kind of, that's what it means to me. I mean, I think anyone could have any, it's one of those words, isn't it? It's
I also think about
movable.
rewilding, and even what you did in kind of your neighborhood, of kind of a rewilding of even small areas.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm really into rewilding, and that it's quite a controversial term over here, and I would say, like I said, I live in a really urban area, but I leave my garden pretty wild. I've got like all sorts of weeds and ragwort, and it feels really wild to me, even though it's just this tiny little kind of yard next to a massive main busy street. But it's got loads of rats in them at the moment. Occasionally there'll be a bad smell of like a dead bird. The compost bin is filled with maggots. I mean, you wouldn't go there and think this is like a romantic with a capital R idea of the natural world. For me, it feels kind of wild. It's kind of, it's just going, it's all going on. So, and I like that. For me, that's relaxing to be amongst.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question from the audience now about nature again. So what do you think about keeping the word nature and using it to reference humans? So there's someone in the audience who started to say, I am nature during meditation practice, because I also struggle with the separation that's been used with the traditional use of the word.
It's a great question, a great comment. Yeah, I mean, we are nature. And I think that that's one of the things that we've completely forgotten, isn't it, that we're animals. I think that's one of the, you know, big problems, is that we don't think we're animals, and we don't think we're connected to other animals. Yeah, I like the idea of nature being about humans. I mean, when I look at my young children, it's so clear that, I mean, that's so nature to me. And even, you know, when you think about everything around you, even kind of plastic and, you know, books. And I love that, I think it's in David Abrams, what is it, I have it somewhere, it's in Becoming Animal, where he talks about his house and the walls and the ceiling, and I can't remember exactly what's happening, but maybe he's listening, we really like thinking about it kind of animistically. And I like that idea of just like breaking up this idea of that kind of Wordsworthian Thoreau-esque idea of nature, but just expanding it, and I don't know, subverting it a bit and making it bigger. I really like that idea.
Yeah, love that. I am nature during meditation.
I love that.
So here's another question from the audience. Do you have any thoughts on millennials and our growing connection to nature versus technology, and how this might affect the way that we function and communicate?
That's interesting. So is that a question asking, will you repeat that?
So do you have any thoughts on millennials and our growing connection to nature versus technology? How might this affect the way that we function and communicate? And I think the we here is millennials.
So is that question assuming that millennials have a growing connection more than, what was it, what's before millennials? I don't even know. Yeah, I think I'm just a millennial, just about. I don't know really. I guess I'm definitely seeing, and I'm not sure if this is answering your question properly, but I'm definitely seeing in my millennial peer group that definitely as people kind of reach their 30s, they tend to grow more of a connection with the rest of the world and the living world. But I don't know if, as much as I can't stand my addiction to my screen, I do think that sometimes technology can be kind of augment that relationship. Like, I find that I've learned a lot through the apps that I have. I have an app called Picture This, and I take a picture and learn from it. And you know, there can be ways of connecting, even, you know, on social media, with people who, you know, who love the natural world. Saying that, and I guess, you know, we always blame screens for kids and so on being kind of cooped up inside, but I wonder if and of course it, you know, it is an issue, but I wonder if there are other issues that it kind of covers up a bit. Like I'm really interested in and kind of annoyed about the dominance of cars and roads. So you know, it's so hard for people to just go out and have a nice walk, or kids to play in the streets, or you know, people to get about because of traffic and how dangerous it is to be on the roads. You know, which is another barrier. I think that, you know, in terms of the millennial generation as well, we are living in a time of rising stress related illnesses and stress, and you know, we know that spending time in restorative living environments can really help us recover from the stresses of life. And so it does make sense to me that the millennials who, you know, have come up, or, you know, gone through financial crisis and this kind of late stage capitalism, and kind of maybe a reassessing of kind of obsessions with productivity and so on, and may find a refuge in the rest of nature.
So the next question is that you touched on the fact that not everyone has the privilege of being able to escape to nature or to have it nearby. And this person is asking, what collective changes or policies can we advocate for to benefit everyone in our community?
That's such a great question.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of the research is on kind of street trees and how powerful nearby trees can be for communities in terms of all the things we've talked about in terms of the physical and mental health benefits, but also the presence of trees has been found to kind of strengthen community bonds, and kids are more likely to play under trees, people are more likely to talk under trees. So I would say a good place to look at is equitable tree cover, and I mean, and then planting trees isn't the panacea, because really we need to be protecting and not chopping down all the kind of old trees. We have a lot of that issue in this country, that beautiful mature oaks, which are homes to kind of myriad species, will be destroyed. But I think looking at that equitable tree cover is a really important thing, and people, that's definitely something that's becoming more talked about and more of a kind of urban planning focus. Also, play areas for kids. So like the difference between just like a tarmac playground and a kind of play area with wilder parts is just huge in terms of how it will impact on a child. And we know that children's mental health is really affected by nearby nature, particularly those who are disadvantaged. So there's some really interesting evidence which shows that kids from vulnerable, disadvantaged backgrounds will benefit much more than those who aren't, from nearby nature. So I would say advocating and putting pressure on authorities for wilder play areas, and by which I mean more biodiverse, more areas to play with loose parts and so on. And yeah, I think those are good places to start.
And I just want to second the idea of more tree coverage in urban areas. There's so many things. If I could just add that crime goes down, home prices go up, and there's such a discrepancy between different neighborhoods, where the wealthy white neighborhoods have trees and poor neighborhoods don't. And there's at least in the US, there's an initiative of the tree equity score that has just started, and really wonderful organizations. Like in San Francisco, we have Friends of the Urban Forest that plants trees. I'm sure there's lots of initiatives like that people could get involved in.
That's really good to know.
So someone asked, how can we cultivate more awe and wonder in our lives?
I'd say get a hand lens if you don't have one already, a loop or just a simple one. It just opens up a different world, like different kingdoms. You can just see so much more patterns and so on. I think I guess one of the things that I kind of really came away with over this, it's been a while of research, is that spending time noticing and watching and looking is not an indulgence in any way. It's not like it's not something that we can necessarily do without. But also, I've definitely tried to kind of change my pace and my attitude of, instead of kind of rushing everywhere or not really looking at anything, just really looking at the street around me, and taking time to look at a brick wall, and look at this spirophytes of the moss, and go really into the lichen, or look at what the horse chestnut tree is doing. And I think that there are opportunities for awe and wonder really everywhere, because even in our urban areas, life thrives, and it does make its way, and it's not, and I mean, you guys in California have really awesome natural areas, and maybe it's because I've had to work harder because I live in a very nature depleted country that I find it there. But I think just looking is a way of finding more everyday awe and wonder. It's just spending that time to look.
Yeah, and I will say that when I was in England, I really loved the life there in England as well. And what I think what you're pointing towards too is just slowing down. That was one thing that I found was really helpful. And then also wanting to add not feeling silly about it, not feeling like it's awkward. Just do it. Just enjoy the wonder. And who cares who's looking, right?
Exactly. I've often found myself like I get some funny looks at my moss wall because I'm just like there looking at this wall. It must look kind of weird. Or I really like watching worms move. And the other day I was like lying on my tummy and just wanted to watch the movement of the muscles of the worms. And I thought someone's gonna stop me, or it felt kind of deviant, like I'm gonna get like told off. But I just thought, no, whatever, I'm just gonna do it, and I just want to look at this worm. It's fine.
Yeah, I feel the same way about bees. We have lots of bees right now in California. And I love just watching them go from flower to flower. And I don't care who
Amazing,
thinks
isn't
I'm
it?
silly crouching down looking at a bee on the ground. But
I wonder what would happen if you started like buzzing yourself, whether you could kind of interact with bees. Like, I don't know, I might try that tomorrow.
I have to try that next time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So another question is, what is your vision for the future?
Wow. Well, I mean, I really think that at the crux of all of our problems right now is inequality. You know, it's a really unequal world, inequality of access to the natural world. So many issues. I think that I guess that, as well as living in a world where a system predicated on infinite economic growth on a finite resource planet, that to me feels incompatible with planet Earth continuing in the way that it is right now. I guess I find the future really frightening because I have young children and I'm constantly kind of veering between different climate anxieties, and I guess what I feel like I can do for the future, or thinking about the future, is try and pass on a sense that finding wonder and awe and kinship and being in relationship with life is something really worthy and of value for all people, and I guess that would be my vision personally for me and my family and my young children, but for all people. And that's kind of why I wrote Losing Eden, and that's what it is. It's mostly a synthesis of like the most important and interesting evidence I could find to kind of suggest that we're overlooking and we're forgetting the link between our minds and the rest of life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think you paint two very compelling visions of the future in your book at the very beginning and the very end. You'll have to read the book to get the full vision, but they both talk about a young child, Zena, and her grandmother, and what one is very dystopian, what the future could be like, and one is very utopian, what the future could be like, and kind of in the lineage of Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. And I hope that that utopian vision is possible.
I reckon it is. I mean, biophilic cities, to me, it just makes sense, you know, this idea that we could, yeah, decenter ourselves a bit and share better, and you know, allow the living world to thrive a lot more, and you know, and make everyone would be happier and healthier, all beings.
Definitely, definitely. Well, I think we're out of time at this point, and thank you so much, Lucy, for this wonderful conversation. It's been so lovely to speak with you today.
It's so lovely for me. Thank you so much for your great questions.
Thank you. All right, and now I'll turn it back to Alex.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We hope you'll join us for more of our upcoming talks and workshops. This conversation was recorded, and if you'd like to watch it again or share it with your community, it will be available on our YouTube page at this same link and later on our Facebook page. We will also feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at www.ciispod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.